There will be a Q&A session after each of our speakers this afternoon. As they are speaking, or indeed at the end of their talk, if you want to ask a question, please do. But if you could put it in the chat function, that would be fantastic. That will enable us to brigade together questions that are similar and to spot any themes that are emerging that we particularly perhaps would like our speaker to address. So if you could put questions into the chat function as we go, that would be fantastic. Now, as many of you will be aware, this event is part and is happening during the college's Festival of Giving. We opened the festival on Thursday night at 6 o'clock and it concludes at 9 o'clock on Sunday. And through it, we are bringing together our community, current students, staff, fellows, alumni, friends and supporters, both to celebrate successes and to join together in achieving further funding in support of our students. So far, as we speak now, we have raised £77,000, and my thanks immediately to those of you on this call, on this video call, who have already contributed and donated money to us. We have a special challenge this afternoon, which is this, and that it is to increase the number of donors who are giving during this festival to 250. At the moment, we're at 204, but if we can get to 250 by midnight tonight, then we unlock a further £1,000 for the college. So if any of you have friends or family you think might be prepared to donate even a small amount, the link is going to be in the chat function in just a moment. And any donation from today until indeed midnight tonight and through much of tomorrow will be doubled by a very, very generous benefactor who has promised to match donations through this period and into the start of tomorrow. And may I also at this point, without naming names, really thank the donor who is amongst us this afternoon, who has been one of our match donors. It's been really enormous fun as well as very effective as fundraising technique to have these match funds and to have the challenges. We have already achieved the large number of kilometers from Cambridge to Dubai to celebrate COP28, which we have covered in all sorts of ambulatory manners, not fossil fuels, of course, but people have run and walked and jogged and kayaked and canoed and been on the erg machines and pogo sticks and goodness knows what else. And we did today actually complete that challenge. And we have completed a couple of others through Thursday and indeed yesterday. That has indeed brought the community together. So thank you very much indeed, those of you who have not only contributed to the fundraising, but also in advance pledged the matches and the challenge funds. Now, it gives me very great pleasure indeed to introduce our first speaker this afternoon. Professor Ed Bullmore became a fellow of Lucy Cavendish College in 2019. He was among the first of our men to join the fellowship when we opened the college both to men and women. And it is a huge pleasure and a privilege to welcome him to speak to you this afternoon. Ed has been professor of psychiatry in the university since 1999. He set up the brain imaging unit in the university, and indeed he directs the MRI mapping of the brain as part of the Wolfson brain unit as well. His research interests have, I think it would be fair to say, focused on networks within the brain, understanding those from neuroimaging, and looking and understanding the relationship of that to health and disease. So Ed, if I may invite you please to talk to us a little bit about your research and interests. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Madeline, for that introduction. And it is a great pleasure to be part of this event. And I'm going to change my title slightly. I know that's an annoying thing academics tend to do. I'm going to ask the question, where do mental health disorders come from? And I'll just sort of give you some indication of what kind of answers we might be looking at in future. I think traditionally, the answer, when we think about where mental health disorders come from, we tend to answer that question by making a binary distinction of one sort or another. So we'll say, oh, it's all in the mind, or maybe it's all in the brain, it's nature, or it's nurture, or it must be the mind because it can't be the body. Whenever we think about mental health, we, I think, tend to split things in our mind and jump one side or other of the line that we've imagined. Now, when I started out as a researcher, which, as Madeline has diplomatically pointed out, was quite a long time ago, I chose to follow the path of the brain. I thought, let's try and understand what's going on in the brain and how much of that can explain mental health disorders. So I obeyed the binary imperative, and I decided to focus on the brain. And it has been a very extraordinary period in brain imaging research, and we can now see things in the brain which, frankly, were invisible to us when I started. And one of the things that has come into much, much clearer focus is this concept of the network organization of the brain. The jargon word for that is the connectome. We now understand much more than we did about how the different elements of the human brain are interconnected to each other, and how those large-scale networks underpin emotion, cognition, language, and when things go wrong, how that is related to mental health disorders and many other brain disorders. And this is a human brain network. This is from an MRI scan. Each of these little spheres represents a brain area. And if they're slightly bigger, that's because they have more connections to the rest of the brain. We call them the hubs of the network. And the colors tell us that the different nodes of the brain network belong to different modules or different communities. So it's quite a complex organization. But what we've also discovered is it's not uniquely complex in humans. So if you look, for example, in a very different kind of animal, the worm, C. elegans, and look at the network organization in that animal, here you're looking at individual nerve cells and the connections between them. The complexity of interactions is roughly the same as in the human brain. The scale is different. There are many, many more neurons or nerve cells in the human brain than in the worm brain, but the complexity of the patterning in the network is about the same. In fact, it's not just the human and the worm that look similar. There are a number of other networks which are nothing to do with brains that show similar complexity of interactions. The global airline network is a classic example. I'm sure many of us have had experiences of traveling long haul through hub airports like Heathrow or JFK in the States. And it's that same concept of a hub that we're seeing in brains, human or otherwise. Which raises the question, what is so special about the human brain? We celebrate ourselves as the most sort of complex and advanced biological system in the universe. I think that's a little bit of narcissism myself. I think there's quite a lot in common between the human brain and various other networks. Another thing that we've really learned, and I think this is one of the most exciting growth points in the field at the moment, is how the brain develops over time. And this is a chart showing brain development from before birth. So this bit of the chart shows what's happening during pregnancy, and then in the first few years of life. And the key point really here is that the brain goes through a massively rapid developmental phase during pregnancy and in the first years of infancy. And it keeps developing into middle 20s. but different bits of the brain develop at different rates. So the white matter in the heart of the brain develops relatively slowly and will keep maturing into early adult life. The gray matter, the sort of cortex, the outer part of the brain, which actually does all the computational processing, reaches its maximum size at about 1 or 2 years of life. And then during the rest of childhood and into adolescence, there's a process called synaptic pruning, which means the brain begins by overgrowing connections to lots of different areas. And then over the course of childhood and adolescence, it selectively prunes down or eliminates those connections until you end up with an adult network. This is all very fascinating from a psychiatric point of view, because this same period of life, the first 2 decades of life, is the period when all mental health disorders have their peak incidence. Major depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, ADHD, all of these mental health disorders arise at the same time as the brain is going through these very active developmental programs. And a lot of us think that mental health disorders come from some kind of aberration or abnormality in how brain networks develop in those first years of life. Another thing that has been really important in recent years is in mental health has been the genetics. And we've known that disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder in particular, run in families. We've known that for a long time, but it's really only in the last 5 or 6 years that we've been able to identify exactly which genes in the human genome are contributing to that risk. And this is work by one of our PhD students. We have absolutely fantastic PhD students in Cambridge, by and large. It's one of the great strengths of our university. This is a woman called Eva Maria Stauffer, who is just completing her PhD. And what she did, which I thought was very innovative and challenging, was to take the genetic data that we have about schizophrenia and link it to the brain imaging data that we have. And what she was able to show was that there are particular bits of the brain highlighted in this map where the risk for schizophrenia seems to change the structure of the brain. And those areas are indeed the hubs of the normal brain network. So this, to me, is quite exciting because it's beginning to join up some dots. It's beginning to link the genetics and particular genes to the organization of the brain, and particularly organization of brain networks. And I think in that way, it's beginning to help us understand how schizophrenia runs in families. How does that genetic risk actually play out over the course of the development of these networks to give us a slightly unusual brain organization, which puts people at risk of the symptoms of psychosis. So that's one area where I've spent a lot of time working in the last few years, but I want to pivot now to a slightly different approach, and then I'll try and bring it back together and tie it all up at the end. So another area of mental health, which is not so much the province of childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, is what is sometimes called comorbid depression or other mental illness. This is the case in, for example, this woman. This is obviously sort of an artist's impression. I'm not showing a real patient, but these sort of problems are pretty common in clinical practice. This is a woman with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, swelling of the hands, painful joints. So it's a disease of the body. But as you can see, she looks depressed. And in fact, it's very, very often the case that people with inflammatory disease of the body have symptoms of mental illness. That is philosophically impossible, at least if you believe in the philosophy of Descartes, the dualist idea that the body and the mind are quite separate things. This was Descartes' famous drawing, showing that the body is like a machine, it obeys the laws of mechanics. You can analyze it mathematically. The mind is something quite different. And that split between body and mind that Descartes introduced in the 17th century is still very prevalent in medicine. It dominates how we make diagnosis, how we organize training, how we organize healthcare. And one of the sort of examples of that split between body and mind, this is something I was taught as a matter of fact as a medical student, which admittedly was, in the mid-1980s, so quite a long time ago, was the concept of the blood-brain barrier. And I've shown it here in this little cartoon from a book I published a few years ago called The Inflamed Mind, which tried to explain some of these issues in a very general way. So this little tube running along the bottom of the diagram is a blood vessel running through the brain. And in that blood vessel, you've got cells and you've got proteins. And in the case of a woman, like the one I showed with rheumatoid arthritis, there will be a lot of inflammatory cells and proteins in the circulation. But the concept of the blood-brain barrier was that none of that inflammatory activity in the body could possibly get through to the brain, because the blood-brain barrier was a bit like a Berlin Wall in the brain. It was considered completely impermeable to inflammatory signals from the body. And one of the exciting things over the last 10 years or so is that we realize that that just isn't true, that there are all sorts of ways in which inflammation in the body can get through to the brain and can change the way the brain works. And that opens up a lot of interesting research angles for psychiatry, because inflammation can be caused by many different things. It can be caused by inflammatory disease like rheumatoid arthritis, or obesity, or physical trauma, or social stress. If you're in a socially stressful situation, let's say you've suffered a bereavement, for example, or you've been exposed to abuse or trauma as a child, your immune system reacts as if you are under threat. And frankly, you are under threat. And there is an inflammatory response to those kind of social stresses that we now understand can get into the brain and change the way the brain works. The most exciting development in the last few years, from my point of view, has been understanding that these immune cells, and I've drawn them here in a little cartoon, which we know go around munching up bacteria and viruses and other germs that get into the body as infectious agents. These same kind of cells are not only eating bacteria, they're also eating synapses. They're eating the little connections between nerve cells. And we understand now that this is how synaptic pruning happens at a cellular level. I mentioned, from about the age of 2 through to the age of 20, we're pruning connections in the brain. We're tweaking the connections between nerve cells to optimize our networks. And it turns out that the immune cells are doing that. They're eating synapses in the brain during development in the same way they eat bacteria to defend us against infection. It's absolutely fascinating. And the last little bit of data I'll show you, again, the work of a brilliant PhD student, Mary Ellen Linnell. She's a medical PhD student, MB PhD student, just graduated earlier this year. And she, again, started with the genetics. This is a very, very powerful anchor point for a lot of analysis that we're doing now in psychiatry. These are, this is a so-called Manhattan plot. So this is the genome stretched out on the x-axis of this plot. And the spikes are telling you where in the genome there's a gene that's very strongly associated with schizophrenia. And Mary Ellen asked the question, well, where are those genes actually activated? Because, of course, every cell in the body has the same genome, but not every cell in the body activates the same genes in the genome. So she said, where are the schizophrenia risk genes activated? And what she discovered was that they're activated in the brain, in the nerve cells, which is what you'd expect, but they're also activated in immune cells. And I think that is consistent with what I just told you about synaptic pruning. Maybe you have immune cells in the brain that inherit these schizophrenia risk variants, that changes the way synaptic pruning happens and leads us to a slightly different network organization over developmental time. Lots of detail there, but what I think is exciting about our direction of travel is that when we return to that basic question, where do mental health disorders come from? I think we're beginning to find a different kind of answer, what I call a non-binary answer to that question. So we can now recognize that there are, in fact, multiple interactions between the psychosocial domain and the biomedical domain, between nature and nurture, between the mind and the body, between physical health and mental health. It's not that we have to make a choice. We can begin to see how these things are joining up, and also how they play out over developmental time. From DNA at conception, we have a unique genomic blueprint, plays out through pregnancy, the first few years of and decades of life and beyond. And for my research, the key question, the one I'm really excited about, is that mental health disorders come from this interaction between the genes that we inherit and the stresses we're exposed to in the environment. Those could be biological stresses like infection, or social stresses like a period of abuse or adversity in early life. This interaction can affect brain network development through the immune system in early life. And that, to me, is a very, very interesting idea. It's not a simple answer, but I think it more accurately reflects the real joined upness of mind, brain, and body than the binary answers we're used to giving in response to that question. So with that, I'll finish and look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Ed. I think that was just absolutely fascinating, and I'll never forget hearing you speak in Hong Kong about your having your tooth abscess and when all that sparked in you. And I read the book after that, which is fantastic, and I highly recommend it to everyone. So I've got a question from Lorna, and she says, a brilliant synthesis of mind and body. You mentioned that these revelations might have impacts on the way mental health care is delivered. Could you say a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So let's just remind ourselves how healthcare is delivered at the moment and has been delivered for well, really at least 100 years. And that is that if you've got a physical health problem, heart disease, joint disease, whatever it might be, you go to one kind of hospital. So in Cambridge, that would be Addenbrooke's Hospital. If you've got a mental health problem, you go to a different kind of hospital. In Cambridge, that is Fulbourn Hospital, or used to be Fulbourn Hospital. Fulbourn Hospital was previously the Cambridge District Asylum. And that's been the way in Western medicine for, I don't know, 150 years, something like that. We exile people with mental health disorders. We push them out of the cities, literally beyond the pale, and we treat them in specialist institutions that are quite distinct from the hospitals that we run and organize for people with physical health disorders. And, you know, when I refer to things like lunatic asylums, it makes it sound like that's all very sort of historical in the 19th century and we've grown up and we do things better, but we don't. We still do things that way. We still have, you know, in Cambridgeshire in 2023, we still have administratively separate organizations for physical and mental health care, different NHS trusts. The physicians that work in physical health and the psychiatrists that work in mental health go through very different training programs. They don't have much to do with each other. They don't really talk each other's language. We have two tribes dealing with physical and mental. And one of the ways that we think things need to change is to try and pull back physical and mental health care into the same organization. And a very exciting example of that that's in planning in Cambridge at the moment is Cambridge Children's, which is intended to be a new hospital that we will build on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus close to Addenbrooke's Hospital. But the unique thing about this Cambridge Children's. And I think it's the first example of this in the UK, is we will have the mental health services and the physical health services for children and young people accommodated in the same building, under the same roof, so that those children and young people coming through get a kind of 360 degree perspective on their problem. They don't have to go off and see a psychiatrist or a physician in a separate building. In one place, they will receive integrated care, and we hope that's going to improve outcomes for those children and young people. We also hope it's going to provide a place where we can offer a different kind of training environment for the next generation of practitioners. So this old-fashioned split between psychiatry and medicine, for example, psychology and medicine, we begin to blur those boundaries, and we have more people coming through that feel competent and confident dealing with both physical and mental health problems. So I think that's a very exciting innovation in Cambridge. And I think, we will see more of that around the world over the next, generation or so. All of these things take time, but I think that is definitely a direction of travel that's going to be important.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Ed. I've got a question now from Nick, and he has said to thank you for your insightful and accessible presentation of this fascinating information. So 2 questions. Does the developmental process you described, including pruning, does that explain why children seem to learn languages more easily than adults? And then he's gone on to say, which is very, very, very Nick, this may be totally unfair and outside your lane, but can you compare the development of the human brain to the evolution of the algorithm drive robotic automation of mental processes, from artificial intelligence to self-awareness and sentience?
Okay.
I could recap on that. It does go on.
No, I've got it in the chat. So thank you. So it's a nice, 2 excellent questions. The first one, I think the answer to that probably is yes, in a sort of in a fairly sort of vague way. I don't know specifically that how synaptic pruning is related to acquisition of language, but as you say, it is true that there are developmental periods when children are able to learn languages or acquire other skills. Mathematics, musical skills famously have kind of critical periods for their acquisition. And those periods do coincide when the brain is very active. I mean, the key concept probably here is synaptic plasticity. And that is to say that the synaptic connections between nerve cells are not fixed, they're mutable, they can change, they can strengthen, connections can strengthen as we learn something. Or they can be eliminated by the synaptic pruning process I mentioned. And we think what's happening in the course of development is that the brain is, basically begins by setting up connections between all sorts of different nerve cells, all sorts of different brain areas, and then it learns which of those connections are important, and those ones get strengthened, and the ones that are turn out to be less relevant are eliminated. Now, it's possible that that process, as your question suggests, Nick, is why language acquisition in the early years is different and better than in later years, because you're learning something at a time when the brain is anyway more adaptive, more plastic, more changeable. So yes, I think you're probably right in making that point, but I don't have any more definite evidence in support of it. In relation to the links between brain networks and AI, I'm going to sort of answer that at a very high level because I'm not at all an expert in AI, but there is a thing called neuromorphic computing, which is important, and that is trying to build AI systems and artificial neural networks that are informed by the architecture of the brain's own network. So that's neuromorphic, means sort of brain-like computing. That is certainly a very interesting area. And as we are getting sort of more and more exact insights into how the brain network is organized, people are putting brain networks into computational models, into AI models, and demonstrating that actually they often perform very well. My intuition is that this might be most interesting in the future in relation to the energy costs of AI, which is something that we tend to sort of neglect a little bit. But if you think about some of the kind of, superhuman feats of AI that have grabbed the headlines. So, I mean, you might have picked up the story recently that somebody developed an AI tool that allowed you to work out the three-dimensional structure of a protein, which is quite a complex problem to solve. And a research group, I think it was the DeepMind group, produced this extraordinary algorithm that could solve 3D protein structures. And that seems like a great achievement, and it is a great achievement, but it costs an enormous amount of energy. I mean, it's something, if solving one protein is something like the equivalent of 50 return flights between New York and Auckland, America and New Zealand, super long haul flight. So these are very, very energy intensive processes. And of course, they have major environmental impacts as well. And I think as that becomes clearer, we may look with envy at the brain, because the brain does fabulously sophisticated computational things for remarkably little energy. I mean, people say the total energy consumption of the brain is something like a 30-watt light bulb in terms of its electrical energy. It's expensive compared to the rest of the body, but compared to a deep learning algorithm on a supercomputer somewhere, it is very, very parsimonious in terms of how it uses energy. And I think that is an area where I would expect neuromorphic computing to really push the envelope, because we can't, it's unsustainable, frankly, to scale AI in an unrestrained way, given its enormous environmental costs. And the brain could give us an answer for how to do things a bit more economically.
That's a very hopeful thought.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see the question from Peter, Ed, about can anti-inflammatories be an effective preventative for possible mental health problems in developing brains?
Yeah, that's a very intriguing question. And again, I'll say the short answer is I don't know, but my intuition is it could be. I mean, the first thing I think we need to show is that anti-inflammatory drugs have effects on mental health symptoms, immediately. So, for example, that woman I showed with depression and arthritis, there is a lot of evidence from clinical trials of anti-inflammatory drugs in patients with inflammatory disease like arthritis, that they feel less depressed as a result of treatment. And in fact, that has quite a that's quite a well-known clinical phenomenon. One of the most potent anti-inflammatory drugs for arthritis is called Remicade. And when that was first introduced, the nurses and doctors that set up the infusions and gave patients Remicade noticed that they all felt better and were very, very immediate. Their moods tend to improve immediately, and they were very grateful to the doctors and nurses that they called it the Remicade high. So this is something that's kind of been around in clinical practice for quite a long time, but we haven't really turned it into changed treatment for comorbid depression yet. I think that will happen, but that's using anti-inflammatory drugs to treat mental health symptoms that already exist. Peter's question is a sort of deeper question, which is, can we use anti-inflammatories to prevent the emergence of mental health disorders? And I think that's a really important question, because if we can understand more precisely this the very long lead time for most mental health disorders, they don't come out of a clear blue sky, really. The first symptoms of schizophrenia might emerge in somebody who's 18, 19, 20, but that's the outcome of a developmental process that's been on a slightly atypical track for maybe 2 decades previously. So if we could predict that, we could, in principle, prevent it. And people are beginning to think about this. I mean, you know, there's some quite serious publications about the concept of vaccinating against mental health disorders, which I think is kind of, sounds a bit wacky when you first think about it, a vaccine against schizophrenia. But it's conceptually plausible. I mean, I think it's something that I would not have thought that was a sensible idea at all 20 years ago. But now I think, that is interesting. I wonder whether we could do that one day. We still need to understand a lot more about the detail of all of this. You know, you can't prevent anything really until you can predict it. And we're still in the process of trying to understand and make these predictions more precise, particularly at an individual level. A lot of the research results, such as the ones I've shown, are really the results of aggregating data over thousands of patients. So there's a challenge in getting it down to an individual patient and being able to make a prediction very precisely in that case. But yeah, I think it's conceivable.
A lot more work to do, but
Absolutely.
You know, people like you are putting us on the right path, and thank you so much. And I'm sure I speak for everyone here to say thank you for giving us that, you know, really fascinating insight into the work that you're doing. And now I'll pass back to Madeline.
Ed, and thank you also from me. That was just one of the most accessible talks I think we have ever had, with lots of metaphors and ways of understanding the points that you were making. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Hugely appreciated. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to our next speakers. We have Sophie Hughes and Elle Gardner-Thomas. Sophie is our assistant senior tutor for pastoral matters in the college, which means that she is the architect and the deliverer, in many cases, of our well-being and welfare programs for students. She joined us last year. Before that, she has been a counsellor in private practice and in educational institutions and in charities. She established wellbeing programs at Hills Road Sixth Form College, which many of you will have heard of. Some may even have been to, and also at the engineering faculty at Imperial College in London. And then Elle Gardner-Thomas also joining us. Elle was a student at Lucy Cavendish College until July of this year, when she graduated extremely well. And she was studying HSPS, that's Human, Social and Political Studies. And she was elected as a sabbatical officer of the Cambridge Students' Union. And that is what she is doing at the moment. She's having a sabbatical year as the officer for students with disabilities. And we are hugely proud to have a Lucy Cavendish College graduate in a sabbatical position. And I have to say, sparing her blushes, that she is doing a fabulous job and also continuing to support the college in much of what we do. So Sophie, I think you're going to start us off, and I think Elle will come in at some point. And then you will again, very kindly agreed to take questions, which you will share between you.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you. I have about 5 minutes to talk to you all. I could talk to you all for days about what we're doing at the college and about the pastoral and wellbeing support for the students. So forgive me if this feels a little brief. I'll try and cover as much as possible in the time that we've got, but please do ask any questions, and I'm always happy to sort of chat following on from this as well. If you have any further questions, you can send me by email. First off, I want to give my absolute thanks to you all. For all of your kind donations and support of the college, we've able to put in place some really unique and really valuable pastoral support within the college. We have various elements of it, which I hope tie in somewhat to what Professor Bolmore said around the various factors which can impact on mental health, and we try and impact on that with the support that we have. We have 3 main ways that we're able to directly support students financially to alleviate kind of financial worries and financial concerns, but also to encourage their access to support, their access to activities, and their engagement with college. So the first of those is our Halls for All programme, which last year supported 91 students, and we gave out around £4,500. And this enabled students to access formal hall, whereas they might not be able to due to the cost of a formal hall ticket. But it also supported students to come into college and use the cafe and the dining hall, which encouraged them to be a part of the community, and really get involved and sort of mix within the college, which was lovely to see across all of those students, and really helped them at a time when they were struggling financially. We also have the Making the Most of Cambridge Fund, which last year we were able to support 192 students across the college, which is a huge number. And we were very fortunate to spend £24,500 on this. And this went towards supporting students to access something in addition to their academic work at college. So we sponsored Cambridge Union memberships. We also sponsored sports kit and equipment. Theatre tickets we paid for, as well as May Ball tickets, and a whole host of other things as well. And it's a really wonderful initiative that enables students to do something that will then enhance their time at Lucy, and really we get wonderful feedback from the Making the Most of Cambridge, and we're on the cusp of launching it again for this year as well, and students are already having conversations with me about what they're going to do, and I love the fact that it's making those students think about activities that they can engage with, which they might not previously be able to. And then the final part of it is the direct financial assistance that the college is able to give some students, and last year we gave out grants in the region of around £18,000 to students. We encourage students to go to the university in the first instance for financial assistance. Their pockets are a little bit deeper, so we do encourage that. But in some instances that the university isn't able to support them, in which case we will do all we can to support them, and we do. And so that is really valuable money that we're able to kind of put towards the students and really help support them in whatever it is that they're struggling with. That's the financial side of things. We also have a number of other initiatives that we kind of work on in the pastoral team. We're really keen to kind of develop our music provision at the moment. And last year we employed a music coordinator for 4 hours a week who were able to kind of get things off the ground for music, but we're looking to develop that and expand it this year. But part of what we have done is sort of buy new equipment for the college. You may or may not be aware that last year, Elle, you can probably correct me, I think we had 4 of the best 5 bands in Cambridge were with Lucy students. So we're very proud of the music that our students are sort of contributing to, and the scene that they're contributing to. We had 3 music scholars last year who came from a variety of backgrounds and musical traditions, and we would love to kind of develop that and kind of work on that going forward, because as many of you know, being engaged in arts and music and the creative side can really be beneficial for students whilst they're studying. And then just finally, I thought I'd update you on what the pastoral team is doing and the structure of our pastoral team, which has changed somewhat over the past few months. Alongside myself, I have wonderful support from a college nurse who, our previous college nurse retired after 16 years. So this prompted an opportunity to kind of review things. So we have a new college nurse who's very proactive. She's already been putting up posts around safety, bike safety, flu, all those sorts of things that really can help sort of low level interventions, but can help sort of minimize any difficulties arising amongst the students. And we also have an SPLD practitioner, so somebody in college specifically designed to work with students with specific learning difficulties. And this role is unique to any other Cambridge college. In fact, I feel it's unique to kind of any other sort of college or kind of educational institution to have one embedded in a department or college, whatever the equivalent place would be, is totally unique and wonderful. And I'm pleased to say she's very busy. So she's meeting lots of students. And then we also have our mental health and wellbeing practitioner who supports our students, a very experienced, she did come from Fulbourn, but a very experienced practitioner who again is sort of started the term and is very busy and is getting on very well and settling in very well into college. So that's a very, very, very brief overview of some of the pastoral support, and also just some of the ways that the wonderful donations and support you've given have had an impact and are continuing to have an impact on what we're doing. So I will take a breath. I will pass you over to Elle. Please do pop any questions you have in the chat and I'll answer them in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sophie. Really useful overview of what's going on at the moment. As Madeline mentioned, I'm Elle. I'm a recent graduate at Lucy Cav, and I now work with the Students' Union as a disabled students officer, so responsible for all students with disabilities, representing them to the university, and also having key roles in implementing new university-wide schemes to do with mental health and how that's treated within the university, and well-being, and how we support students who are suffering with both mental health conditions and disability. So it's a really important role, I feel, and something that I'm very happy to be doing. But I couldn't have got to the position I got to and found this passion that I have without Lucy Cav. I joined Lucy Cavendish when it was a mature women's college as one of the first groups of 18-year-olds in that first year, when it was still a all-female college, but they took a few under 21-year-olds. So watching the college change from going from a very small college to the growing college it is now has been fantastic to see the diverse, representative, dynamic community keep growing year on year. But none of this growth could have been possible without the generous support that has enabled, like Sophie mentioned, new bursaries, student societies, funding, etc. None of this could have been possible without this support. There's been so much change in my time at Lucy. New societies have popped up, such as netball, tiddlywinks, arts and crafts, all sorts, choirs, so much to get involved in, which has really enriched the student experience and allowed the community at Lucy to keep growing and to become more connected and to get people together in ways that wouldn't be possible without having these societies within the college, and also without having that funding to be able to access those opportunities, which has led to sporting excellence with the college. Our football team is particularly good, both the men's and the women's side. And also, as Sophie mentioned, in terms of our music scholars and bands, also artistic excellence as well. But despite all of the changes and progress the college has made since I arrived, from there being a new building to new staff, the one thing that has always remained the same about Lucy Cavendish, and what I feel sets it apart as a really unique place, is its genuine care for students. Since my first day when I arrived here, like quite a few years ago now, to now, the care that the college has shown for every single one of its students, and what I feel is a very unique emphasis it places on genuine well-being for students, is something that is next to none, and that really makes the college what it is. The students, I feel, and me as well personally, have hugely benefited from the tailored welfare support that makes navigating the difficulties of Cambridge so much easier. Sophie mentioned, for example, the new roles that have just been put in place, such as the specific learning disabilities practitioner and the mental health and wellbeing practitioner. That, I think, really demonstrates the way Lucy molds and breaks boundaries to really support its students. There is no other college that is doing anything close to what Lucy Cavendish is doing, and it's really positive when I'm sitting in my job in committees to constantly see Lucy Cavendish held up as an example of what colleges are doing things well, and what really, like, Lucy Cavendish is constantly brought up as an emblem of like real care for student welfare, and for really like blazing new paths in how we can support students and uphold mental health wellness, which is very it's a lovely feeling to be in these committees and have that. But again, none of this would have been possible without your generous support. There are students, myself included, who have really been able to make the most of Cambridge and get through sometimes what can be quite difficult and overwhelming academic times, but have only been able to do that due to the generous support of people, and I know many of whom are sat in the room. So a real personal, heartfelt thank you to everybody for your donations and the support you've given. It really does have an impact on creating a wonderful community.
Thank you, Elle. We are very proud of you, Elle. You represent everything that we want Lucy Cavendish to be and everything that it is. So thank you. Well done, Elle. Happy to answer some questions. If not, I'm more than happy to sort of expand a bit more on the support that we offer and talk a little bit more. I suppose I could talk a little bit about what support we offer students when they arrive at Cambridge and when they start their studies, because that obviously, as we know, transition can be a difficult time for students, whether that's transition into an undergraduate degree or a transition into a postgraduate degree from another educational institution. And what we do is we ensure that sort of tutors reach out to the students when they arrive. We have 30 tutors working at the college now who each have around 30 students that they support, and they all proactively, or they do reach out to their students within the first week or two arriving, and so are there to support them and answer any questions they might have about settling into Cambridge with its nuances, its acronyms, its funny ways, and so they'll support with that, but they'll also support getting to know the city and getting used to university life as well. And we've done various the porters are brilliant at talking to students as well, and we'll do communications on the website as well about information. And also the admissions team do wonderful work before the students arrive to kind of adjust them and educate them and help them and support them with those sorts of transitions as well. I've got a question here. How has the culture changed since the expansion? So as somebody who came in post-expansion, I'm not necessarily best placed to answer this. I'll pass over to Elle in a minute, but I will say anecdotally, all I've heard is just that really the culture hasn't changed that much, and that actually it's still fundamentally, Lucy at its heart, and the real mission to kind of support students and reach out to students who might not otherwise be able to access the education at Cambridge. And as Elle referred to, the kind of the welcomeness and the friendliness, I hear every day has kind of remained the same. But Elle, you might want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think, I completely echo what Sophie is saying. I think the culture just become a bit more lively, I would say, which is a good thing. With there being so many more students from such a wider range of backgrounds and just so many more people to meet, and people setting up new events all the time. I think this was also, compounded by the fact my first year was during the coronavirus pandemic. So suddenly when you came back and there were so many more students, and you were able to interact with everybody, but the core values of Lucy, I found it actually quite surprising positively that the close-knit community feeling that I got when my year group had under 50 students in it still stayed the same. Even though the college is now over 1,000 members, that close-knit community feeling has not changed, which has been really lovely.
Thank you, Elle. Cynthia, I hope that answers your question. I've got another question here from Lorna. What is the top priority thing that you're not able to provide at the moment? So I'm aware that Madeline and Joe will be watching what I say here. I think I've already alluded to it. We would love to expand our music provision. I think we're well aware we have good sports teams, and those clubs are really developing at pace and doing very well, and enjoyed. One of Elle's best friends was the captain of the netball team last year, which I think is probably why Elle mentioned it first off, but it's very good and it's a good social netball team. So those things are developing well. But Madeline and I have discussed at length that we are aware that there's a lot of students for whom sport isn't their their way of relaxing and their support for their mental health. And actually there's a lot of students for whom other arts would be, whether that's music or anything else. And it would be lovely to be able to kind of expand that and give those opportunities to students. We've got our beautiful music pavilion, which is now being used on a Tuesday evening by the University Flute Society. And I saw a video of their rehearsal last week. It sounded beautiful coming out of the music pavilion, but it would be wonderful to build on that a bit more and to hear the music around college a bit more. So I would love that to develop. And also the other hot potato at the moment is obviously cost of living and all the expenses that come with the associated costs of that. We do a lot. We run cost of living events throughout the year. We provide free period products for students across the college as well. So there are measures we're putting in place. But one thing we are aware of is that rents are incredibly high, and would love to be able to support our students with the rent costs. We do as much as we can, but we would love to be able to do more so that students aren't worrying about that. And so I feel that they're the two priorities in terms of students' mental health at the moment and how we could best help. Elle, do you think there's anything I've missed that you're sort of from knowing the students a bit better?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Sophie. Yeah, we do have some music provision in college. Like, I was president of the college choir when I was there, and that was brilliant. But having more funding for that, and offering different opportunities in music is definitely something, and other arts, as well as the rent, I think. Yeah, because the sports teams are doing great, but I think having other opportunities would be fantastic.
Thank you, Elle. Has anybody else got any other questions? We've just I've got, is the support needs of female and male students the same, or are students just students? That came from Nick. Thank you, Nick. So yes and no, I think, is probably the answer. I think fundamentally at the end of the day, there are lots of issues which our male and female students encounter, which are very similar, which we go out of our way to sort of support them with. But I think there always will be unique challenges that will be faced by female and male students. I think what we try and do to support that is, I'm very keen on giving students options of support, so that if they feel comfortable going to one person, that's brilliant. But if they don't, then there's always somebody else that they can go to, another route they can take for accessing support, whether that's in college or at the university. I'm keen on that. And what we try and do with our tutors is we try and make sure that we have a broad range of tutors from different, we have male and female tutors, we have older, younger tutors, we have tutors from all over the world, and sort of I really want diversity within our tutor team, so that if students are struggling to talk to their tutor, whether that's because it's a male-female issue, there are then options that we can kind of direct them to. And that's how I think we kind of make up for that. We've just launched, well, not launched, we've just started having a case management system, which we haven't had previously. And it will enable us as a team, as a pastoral team, to really track what students are presenting with and what they're talking with much better. And it may be that in a year's time, I come back to you, Nick, and I say, actually, no, there is a difference. And it's showing that there's a real concern amongst the female students about X, Y, whatever it might be. But hopefully the new case management system will be able to show us things like that. But I hope that answers your question.
I think you've exhausted the questions, and thank you both very much indeed for your talks and for covering what we're doing in the college at the moment. Indeed, thanks enormously to the donations that we have received, to our benefactors and donors. And thank you both again for your contribution to the life in the college. And Elle, thank you for being with us through that difficult transition, first through COVID, and then as we actually went mixed, as they say. You were indeed the guinea pig cohort, and we're just so delighted that you and indeed your friends came through that very difficult period so well. It's great, greatly to your credit and to your resilience that you did that. So if I may now pick up one of the themes that you have touched on, Sophie, and that is actually music and the creative arts, because we have, since we were founded in 1965, understood the significance of music and creative arts, drama, and not least, in the way in which students find other people who they want to make friends with, or professional networks outside of their course, and indeed the sheer pleasure and enjoyment that is gained by coming together with others to create music or to create drama or improv or whatever it might be. And indeed, Sophie also touched on the fact that our music pavilion, which is on the Strathard lawn now, that was quite an interesting move, moving that building across, is indeed a place where students can go, regardless of their music ability, to play instruments, to practice, to play with others, whether it's piano or drums or whatever it is. And we have been a huge supporter into the university itself, so from Lucy Cavendish into the university, to broaden within the university the range of music opportunities that are provided to students, because we know, as a college that does not have a chapel, does not have a chapel choir tradition, where our students are coming from such a diversity of background, many of them have not been in a school which had any music provision at all, as a matter of fact, that all sorts of genres of music are of interest to them, and indeed they have capability and expertise in these, but they may well not be the kind of traditional Christian choral tradition that one associates with Cambridge colleges and Cambridge chapels. And so we've been huge supporters of the university's establishment of the Centre for Music Performance, which aims to cover just about every imaginable genre of music, opening up opportunities for students with minority music interests in their college to find others and enjoy making music with others in all sorts of ways. And as I think you said, Sophie, we starred last year with music in bands across college from students who are here at Lucy. And indeed, we do have a choir and a non-audition choir, and that the Cavendish Chorale, and that's fantastic. And we do have students who play at very high levels classical musical instruments, but we also want to support and encourage all sorts of other music, and indeed the interface between music and the spoken word. And so we have all sorts of ideas around that. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce a very short video, some of our current great performers. My thanks to the students who participated in that short video. You saw in the background the drum kit. Next time we meet together, we will have we'll show you our expertise through the students on the drums, I think. One of the jokes that was going the rounds when we set up the Centre for Music Performance in the university was that there were 28 organs in the university in perfect working order, and not a single complete drum set in the whole university, which kind of made the point about the rather restricted range of opportunity for music expression that we had at that time across the university. So again, we very much at Lucy, we're one of the pioneers with 2 other colleges, I would say, really pushing for this much wider expression of music and recognition of other genres. So it brings us to the end of this event. My thanks again to our speakers for being with us today and sharing what they're doing, their insights, their research, and indeed how your donations have helped us to succeed in the objectives that we had in 1918 when we decided to start the second chapter of this amazing college's history. And just to recap, we are now indeed the most diverse college in Cambridge by several kilometres or a country mile, probably across Oxford as well, though I don't have all the data for that. We know that our outreach programme, again, funded by Benefactors, which works with 700 sixth formers now every year in the UK, online for free, has indeed succeeded in its 2 aims. First, to optimize their A-level grades, and secondly, to help them make competitive and compelling applications to the Russell Group universities. That's the elite universities in the UK. We know that from our first 2 cohorts, 98% of those 700 who were on that scheme did indeed get a place in a Russell Group university to study at undergraduate level. And of those that applied to Cambridge, any one of the 28 colleges that take undergraduates, the offer rate was double, actually more than double, the normal offer rate of applicants to Cambridge. So close on 40% of our students on that programme, that academic attainment programme, got an offer to a Cambridge college, at a Cambridge college, whereas the average offer rate is about 17%. So huge thanks to those of you who have contributed to that programme, and also indeed to Trinity College, who has also now stepped up and put funding in behind it. It is unique and it is at scale and it is clearly working. So again, our thanks for that. In terms of our fundraising for scholarships for master's students, international master's students in underserved communities or from low-income backgrounds, again, we've doubled the number of those scholarships over the last couple of years, and we now have 85 different countries represented in this college, including now 8 countries that the UN would classify as LDCs or less developed countries. And we have many, many more students from the global south than we had 5-6 years ago. And that gives us a vibrancy and an opportunity for our students not only to make friends, but also to establish the beginning of professional networks across the community here at Lucy Cavendish, which will stand them in very good stead. I think you may have seen from our previous bulletins to you all that something like 50% of our graduates go on to lead organizations or to be innovators in those organizations that are focused on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that is a tradition and a reputation that we're immensely proud of here at the college. And it is thanks to your donations and to remembering us in your wills that we are able to go out and seek and support and bring in and enable to thrive those exceptional people who are going to be the leaders of the future and who have a real passion and commitment to make a positive impact on our society for the benefit of all of us, humankind, and not least for the planet on which we all depend. So thank you. You are enabling us to fulfill our mission and purpose, and indeed to be a change maker for the university as a whole. Not that they would thank me for saying that, but our previous Vice-Chancellor has always said we are the dynamic change across collegiate Cambridge. With that, I will bid you all a final thanks. Once again, remind you that if you have any friends or family who might just possibly be a donor and help us to reach that 250 target by midnight tonight, please do forward the link to them. And we will very shortly, after Sunday, tomorrow, we will let you know what the total funding raised has been, and indeed the ways in which it is going to benefit existing students and future students. So from all of us here at the college, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for what you're doing for us. And we wish you every success. Good night, goodbye, good morning.